What is going on, everybody? Travis Fowler, Harkrider, back once again this week with another edition of the Tights and Turnbuckles podcast. So it is time, once again, as it is on every episode, it is time to talk pro wrestling. And let's just kind of go over some of the highlights from this past week. And then we can also talk about, hey, what may be working, what maybe could we see? Maybe there's some theories to talk about because I've got one for you, and it involves the War Games match. So before we get there, quick recap of some of the things that took place this week. Over on Raw, it looks like this year's Survivor Series War Games for both men and women is going to be comprised of both Raw and SmackDown stars. I think we got that confirmation last night on SmackDown specifically, especially with the War Games match. But seeing the constant interference that we've seen on both Raw and SmackDown from certain women in their divisions, such as like Nia Jax and Tiffany Stratton, you've seen Liv Morgan and Raquel Rodriguez showing up as well. So that trend continued this past week, and in the main event of Monday Night Raw, we saw the women's tag titles on the line with Bianca Belair and Jade Cargill taking on Liv Morgan and Raquel Rodriguez. Match was pretty good for what it needed to be, and the champs retained the titles to no one's surprise. Also, we saw the continuation of the Bloodline saga. The OGs and the new Bloodline are searching for a fifth member. And I remember when I heard that they were looking for man number 5 this past week, I kept thinking to myself, why are we even doing this? Why are they doing the 5th? Because we've already got the 4-on-4 setup, the OGs versus the new, and you don't need to involve anybody else. But I don't want to get too far into that because I want to save that for something that I think actually is a very interesting theory in my own personal opinion. Yes, it's something that I thought about. I'm sure a few others have thought as well. So I don't want to talk too much about the 5-on-5 versus 4-on-4 just yet, but that did continue on this week. Damian Priest is still continuing to make headway as being a top echelon star, doing a good promo back and forth with Gunter that ended up in a match with him and Ludwig Kaiser later on, which he would ultimately win. The Wyatt Six faction and the Final Testament faction had their confrontation along with The Miz for the Final Testament. And I saw somewhere where somebody was like, that needs to be a War Games match. But you kind of limit yourself with that because there's only one woman on each side, and you know that they would have to interact solely with just each other. So as much as I kind of like the notion, I just don't see that would take place at any point right now unless it was the main story, which it's not. It's not the main story going into Survivor Series War Games this year. The Bloodline definitely deserves that spot. And, I don't think the women actually have too much that they can gripe about when it comes to the War Game side of things either. I think they're trying to bring all these different stories into one huge War Games match, which that's always worked out well when it's done correctly. So I don't have an issue with how they're doing, and despite what some people would say, thinking that the Final Testament and the Wyatt Six faction deserves War Games over the women's, I disagree. I think the women deserve their own War Games match, just like they've received for several years now. So let's not mess with a formula when it's not broke yet. So let's just stick to the basics there. On NXT, we saw a main event for the Women's North American Championship where Kalani Jordan would try to regain that North American Championship from Val and Henley. It was unsuccessful. In that same episode, we saw them talk about Chase U being put on the line this upcoming week to take on Ridge Holland. And if Ridge Holland wins, Chase U is done. So that's going to be fun to see how that all falls out this upcoming week on NXT. Sol Ruka is the first to qualify for the Women's Iron Survivor Challenge. And remember, this was a concept that a lot of people were very unsure about when it was announced a couple years ago. And I gotta say, for it being a brand new type of matchup and an innovative one at that, I really enjoyed the first iteration of the Iron Survivor matches from the first deadline. Last year's was that much better because they had that amazing comeback with Trick Williams take place, and it was just so good. I've rewatched it this past week a couple times, and the way they pulled it off was so good. It felt so organic, and it really had you wondering if he was going to get the fall that he needed to go up 4-all on a what would have been a four-way tie with 3 wins apiece. It was just so good, and I think the concept of the Iron Survivor Challenge has ended up being one that a lot of people look forward to, and honestly, I think it's just going to get better the more we see it. I think there's going to be classic Iron Survivor Challenge matches that we'll be talking about for years to come. I do believe the first women's one is one of those already. So I really expect there to be more to come from this match stipulation, and eventually I think we'll see it on the main roster, which will be pretty interesting to see who they put in it and how it ends up unfolding. The tag team division on NXT as well is going full board, and it looks like they're trying to bring some notoriety and some eyeballs back to the tag team division for NXT, which is great. They've got a lot of teams to utilize, so I think that's going to be a successful venture. On the AEW side of things, this was a packed card for Dynamite this week, and I gotta say, I think a lot of people feel like this just didn't quite stick the landing. It wasn't really all that entertaining as much as I hate admitting it. It just wasn't. It was kind of a very much a gigantic mess. First off, the Moxley and his Death Riders seizing the Superstation was nothing more than him coming out and conducting a promo. That was pretty much all it was. There was nothing really of a seize or a takeover, at least in my mind, and several other people felt the same way. So I don't really get what that was all about. House of Black defeating FTR to go into Full Gear's 4-way match for the tag titles was a great decision. I really didn't know if they were going to give FTR that kudo, or are they actually giving House of Black more of an opportunity on TV weekly, because that's what it seems like it's been recently, and I am all for that. The Konosuke Takeshita Adam Cole main event, basically, I kind of expected Adam Cole to lose this match, especially after Roderick Strong picked up his win, because I feel like that's going to be kind of the story going into it, is that Roddy got the match, but now MJF is going to have to put out a beating on his friend, which will give Adam Cole more of a reason to go after him. But I really just am not feeling the MJF Cole story either. I feel like that they settled that obviously way too soon, but it's because they didn't understand the severity of Adam Cole's injury and if he'd be able to come back anytime soon. So I get why they did it. It was what it was. The tag team grudge match with Adam Page and Christian Cage against Juice Robinson and Jay White of the Bang Bang Gang, it did what it was supposed to do. I didn't really care for it. Just wasn't my thing. I'm not into the story at the moment, so I can't really say I enjoyed it. The Will Ospreay Kyle Fletcher promo was a great back and forth. Had zero issues with anything there. I gotta say also, on top of that, Bobby Lashley and the Hurt Syndicate are looking phenomenal. Like, absolutely amazing. All props to the Hurt Syndicate, and I can't wait to see what else they pull off here in the AEW roster. Leo Rush and Swerve Strickland was also a fun matchup for really more than just that one spot. And I know I kind of jumped a little backwards talking about that match, considering Bobby Lashley came out at the end of that match. But the little spot where they had Leo Rush do the backflip off the apron and then Swerve doing his flip over the top and then like a handstand to the floor was really awesome. The in-syncness of those two worked so well for that one spot. Such a cool visual. Britt Baker and Penelope Ford it was there. And again, I said last week on the show that I've really respected that AEW is actually starting to put more of a focus back on the stars that are their homegrown talents. It's a great change of pace. I think it's going to be wonderful for the overall brand. Serena Deeb is there, and I don't even know what they're really supposed to be doing. I don't get where Baker's story is supposed to go. So I guess we'll see how things play out with that. On the TNA side of things, Joe Hendry's still chasing the world title while the system was celebrating the X Division title win of Moose, and a ring ceremony was actually held. So it was pretty entertaining there. The tag team division is also heating up over there with the Rascals getting hopefully another opportunity to get the TNA tag titles and refocus. At least that's the way they pegged it on the YouTube channel. So a lot of cool things happening over there. Speedball Mike Bailey, we'll talk about here in a minute, obviously was the one that lost the X Division title match to Moose, but it makes me wonder if they're going to have any culmination to him and Trent Seven, since Trent's the one that betrayed him last week, costing him the X Division title. But we'll see where that ends up going. Then on SmackDown, we saw one of the most emotionally investing promos that Cody Rhodes has done since his title reign. And I've seen a lot of people make that same sentiment echoed. And yeah, it worked so good. And this feud with him and Kevin Owens is going to be amazing. I called it all the way back at Bash in Berlin. And I feel like they are going to just deliver on everything I said. And I did say this would become Cody's personal feud that would actually cement his title reign, and I still stand firm behind that. It ain't the Orton one, at least not yet if we get that far, but for right now, Owens is the perfect foil for Cody, and I cannot wait to see what they do when they actually lock up. Now, aside from that, we saw a great main event again for the women. Matter of fact, I think this was the first week that all three shows had a main event pegged that involved the women's division. Because again, Naomi and Nia Jax had a women's title match with a killer spot. It was the same one that was done by Britt Baker and Mercedes Moné at All In. And it did look vicious on this one too. Like, timing was excellent. However, Nia Jax picked up the win and retained the title, the women's championship, over on SmackDown. Speaking of titles, though, the United States title tournament for the women kicked off this week, and the first one to advance was none other than Bayley herself. So that is a good start there. The Street Profits and Motor City Machine Guns had a tag title match that was interrupted by Tommaso Ciampa, who looks like he's going absolutely berserk on the tag teams that were involved in that match, and then he would even turn on Johnny Gargano as well. It was just a lot of fun to see that Ciampa is doing his loose cannon routine, but I like several others and thinking, man, I really would prefer if they have Johnny turn with him and have a heel DIY team. We got a little glimpse of that down in NXT when they were both in that organization, or that brand, if you will, and I think a heel DIY would be a lot of fun, especially on the main roster, and with the teams that you have them working with currently, it would fit just like a glove. But the Bloodline story taking center stage once again, and rightfully so. They had the standoff of the 4-on-4, but then we saw who would come to be the fifth member of the new Bloodline team for War Games, and it is none other than Big Bronson Reed, which is perfect because guess what, guys? As he confirmed earlier today on his social media X account, he was a Samoan of European descent, and I don't want to mispronounce it wrong, so I'm going to throw it up here on the screen, and you can see the word that he put. And yeah, when you look up the definition, he is a Samoan with European descent, so he kind of fits right in with the Bloodline story. And then we saw the heartbreaking phone call that was not meant to be. Roman Reigns attempting to call Paul Heyman, the wise man as he referred to him as, and the phone has been disconnected. Which some people pointed out, if you remember back when Solo was taking over and kicked Jimmy out of the Bloodline, Solo crushed Paul Heyman's phone. So others have been more critical to be like, well, he would have had a new phone by now anyway, so what's the real deal? And they're not wrong. I see where they're coming from on that. but I also think this could be a great story element to bring Paul back to TV. Seeing his tribal chief not being able to get in touch with him really did something to him and affects him and could bring him back. This goes into my theory that I'll talk about here in just a moment for War Games. Now that we've got the weekly review of the wrestling shows out of the way, let's talk about some of the fun news going on. First off, let's talk about the taped shows that have been making the rounds, because it looks like WWE has been on a do a live show, then tape a show spree that they used to do back in the early 90s for the last couple of weeks. And it looks like more of that is going to happen going into November further on, as well as December. And some people have thought, well, maybe this is a cost-cutting measure because there had been some talks within the TKO group to scale back on production a little bit because it is so costly to take a show out on the road on a weekly basis. So this might be a new formula, or really going back to an old formula that WWE used to do back in the 90s. We could be seeing that revisited. And then I've seen other people just be like, well, it's during the holiday time. So the fact that they are getting holiday time with their families is very important and amazing for the whole roster and crew. Even Ryback tweeted out his acceptance of this and appreciation for WWE taking new considerations to people and their families during the holiday seasons. And I honestly don't have a problem with them doing the tape shows, because I personally don't like looking at spoilers, which some people have already spoiled the Raw episode coming up this Monday, which was a tape show. But I have not seen any spoilers on purpose because I don't want to know what happens. And that to me is the main key. If you don't want to know what happens, then don't spoil it for yourself. Just because you have social media doesn't mean you need to watch the videos when they talk about, hey, look what happens this upcoming week or something to that effect. You can avoid that by just simply scrolling past it, much like you can avoid a lot of things by just scrolling past. Some choose to do so, some get sucked in. I prefer, at least in this case when it comes to the spoilers, I ain't getting sucked in. So, I'm looking forward to seeing what happens on Raw. I know I have a little bit of an inclination, and that plays into my theory that, again, I know I've been teasing it, and I'll get to it momentarily because, trust me, I have been sitting on this, and I think it could potentially happen for Survivor Series, and it plays into the 5th member for the OG team as well. But I talked about Mike Bailey earlier, and he is supposed to hopefully have a payoff with his Trent Seven betrayal before long, because there is word going around that he is now officially a free agent. Now, I know that there's been TV tapings already for Impact that are in the can, so I'm sure one of those episodes may show the finality of Bailey and Seven's situation. But him being a free agent now, there is a report through Fightful that he is AEW bound. And I'm not surprised, nor do I think he would be a good fit in WWE, at least right now. But I just think AEW has such a bloated roster that it's almost honestly stupidity to sign anybody else at this point. You have way too many people on your roster as it is that you don't know what to do with, even though a brand split I think could legitimately work, as in like AEW Ring of Honor. We've talked about that before, and I digress. But I don't know how, even though a man of his talents, Mike Bailey's talents, fits perfectly with AEW, I just don't see where you can factor him into anything right now. Does that mean that he can't do something? No, of course not. You know, some people are like, he can go on Collision or Rampage or whatever. Rampage, I think, is an absolute death, but that's just my opinion. Collision is a little bit better. They try to stack that card. I don't know, just AEW just hasn't been hitting for me the way that it used to over the last couple of weeks. I'm hoping they get that turned around. There's been some people that have been talking about Jon Moxley having control over his whole story right now with him and the Death Riders. Some people are saying that they are banking on this story to bring that notoriety back to AEW. And if that is the case, I have to say, for now at least, where we are at, it's not working. Something just isn't clicking like it did when we first saw the return of Moxley with these Death Riders. It isn't, something isn't quite working out to where I'm interested in what happens next with them. That could easily turn around. I don't know what it has to do in order to turn around, but something's got to change, because not only is the TV show actually suffering at this point, but it looks like as if the actual show itself is starting to suffer when it comes to ticket sales. There was news that made the rounds that there was a show they had booked in December that the venue has decided to no longer host, so they had to cancel the show and move it to a different venue. And it was, I think the rumor going around is they had only sold about 1,000 to 2,000 tickets in the arena that they had, and it was a 15,000 seat arena. And we know this has been a constant problem with AEW, is booking big time arenas with small crowds, and you can't do that consistently. Even though you got your TV deal and the money deal is there, you can't keep booking the way you do, or you can't keep booking venues the way you do, especially, and thinking that 1,000 people in there is just as good as what 15,000 would be in that arena if it was packed. You've got to make a change somewhere, and I personally wouldn't mind seeing them scale down to different arenas aside from the big ones, so that it does have more of a big feel. Look at how TNA has succeeded this year. They run smaller venues, but they all feel important because they invest the crowd into their stories and what they're doing with their matches, and it's worked for TNA. TNA has done wonderful. Granted, I have even accounted that NXT's partnership has been a big part of their success, but it still has worked out well for them, and it could continue to do so for TNA as well as for AEW if they eventually decide to take that route, which I hope that they end up doing. And speaking of TNA, a former head of the creative direction of TNA that unfortunately was unceremoniously, I'm going to get it right, let go from the company earlier this year, Scott D'Amore, had apparently been spotted at the WWE PC, which some people are starting to think, is this going to be maybe some kind of combination with his new, or I should say rejuvenated Maple Leaf Pro up in Canada? There could be a lot of things going in there. We know him and Triple H were the ones that masterminded Jordynne Grace's appearance in the Rumble this year, so there's obviously a hefty amount of respect there. It is going to be interesting to see if anything does come from this, but for now, all it is we saw that he had been spotted at the PC. For what? We don't know. Could it be just a simple visit? Who knows? Only time will tell what comes from this, but I think it is great that WWE is starting to take notice of other independent promotions, and especially doing the WWE ID program, which has our own here in Oklahoma, Cappuccino Jones. Again, I believe we spoke on this briefly last week, him being a great representative for the Oklahoma State, as well as a great in-ring prospect that is looking like he's going to have an opportunity to shine on the big stage, is amazing. And it is for all of those people that have been named in the WWE ID program for this first class thus far. So congrats to everybody on that. It's a wonderful opportunity, and I can't wait to see what WWE continues to do with this along with the NIL program. Now, before we go into the final topic, which is my theory on the Survivor Series War Games, people, I gotta say, I tuned in to the Netflix special just last night of Tyson and Paul, recording this on a Saturday evening, and I had issues like a lot of people did, except on the main event. The main event was clear. Tyson and Paul, I watched clearly with no buffering, no anything, and it was wonderful. But I saw a lot of people, obviously, rightfully so, complaining and talking about, hey, is this going to be a problem for WWE in January? Twofold reasons as to why that's not the case. One, like I've seen so many talk about already, they're not going to have nearly the traffic that the Tyson-Paul fight had, which was reported today, 65 million people watching that fight live. So they're not going to have that every single week. No offense, WWE, I just don't see it happening. But we don't have to worry about that traffic. And on top of that, this was their first live event that they had ever broadcasted, not just for sporting, but live event for Netflix, period. So there was guaranteed to be some kinks that'll need to be worked out. Plus, you've got an NFL game that is going to be streaming on Christmas, which I believe is set to be the Chiefs versus the Steelers on Netflix. And that'll be another time that they can get anything else worked out before the debut episode of Raw in January, which, by the way, the new logo is making its rounds on the internet as well. Check it out over here on this split screen. But I don't think that's going to be anything we'll need to worry about when it comes to Netflix come January. So, again, it was a first-time event. The traffic was huge, and they've got time between now and January. I believe 6th is the debut episode of Raw on Netflix. So, a lot of time, a lot of chances to get everything worked out before then. So, have no fear. I think it'll work out just fine. And I also think the Survivor Series War Games 5-on-5 match will also end up being just fine. But I felt like a lot of people felt that the War Games match should have been left as a 4 versus 4. Because you already had the family dynamic established and you don't need to add a 5th in there. Yes, the Bronson Reed segment ended up working out well, and by all accounts it looks like Seth Rollins will be the one that fills that 5th spot for the OG team. But let me run a theory by you that I think could be very possible, and it plays into the Paul Heyman factor as well. So let's say that Seth is the one who accepts the 5th spot for the War Games match at Survivor Series. And we'll even say that rumoredly this is supposed to be taking place on Raw this week. Okay, 5-on-5 is established. Seth has a history with Roman through the Shield, as well as their back and forth many a times. Could they coexist? Can it work? There is a history there at one time when they enjoyed each other. So, I mean, there was a time where Roman called Seth his brother in arms. So there's a family dynamic, quote, there. That all sounds good. And you can have the build all the way to Survivor Series of those 5 individuals on each team against each other. But what if the Paul Heyman factor becomes relevant at Survivor Series? Let's say somewhere during the night, Reed attacks and takes out Seth Rollins from the War Games match. I'll even say this could be done on the go-home episode of Raw or SmackDown, preferably Raw, because then you could do like a big reveal on SmackDown. And that would create last-minute anticipation for the War Games the next night. But anyway, let's say Seth Rollins gets taken out of this match. Well, now they've got to find a 5th. Well, who else would have a 5th in their back pocket except the wise man, the one he tried to call but could not get in contact with? What if Heyman reaches out to Roman at the last minute and is like, don't worry, I've got somebody that can actually come and help you. And then, lo and behold, his best friend, CM Punk, who is just announced to be showing up at Survivor Series in Canada. This past week, they announced him to be appearing. What if he is that 5th and final participant for the team of the Bloodline? Paul has always known him as family. Paul is like family to the Bloodline. So it could work. I could see Punk filling that spot. Plus, it gives yet another reason for Punk and Rollins to hate each other, and that can build to their match at WrestleMania. So there's so many different ways that could actually work out well for everybody involved. And I don't think it's too far-fetched that we could see that taking place. Again, we could do it on the go-home Raw, and then you could have the Punk reveal on that SmackDown, or even save it all the way until the Survivor Series show itself. That's probably what I would do. But, yes, would I have preferred the 4-on-4? Yeah. But as a Kenny Thought on Twitter likes to say, and he and I went a little bit back and forth this morning and agreeing on it, I think the 5-on-5 will end up being just fine. No matter what it is, The outcome will be amazing, and I still am looking forward to War Games as I do every year because I love the fact that they brought back a WCW tradition originally to NXT, but now they've given the Survivor Series brand something of importance too for the main roster, and the War Games stipulation being attached to the Survivor Series brand has been an A+. I love it. I hope it continues to go forward like this, as it just makes a nostalgic heart like mine extremely happy. Guys, that's all I got for you this week. What do you think of the Survivor Series War Games? Do you think it should have stayed the 4-on-4, or will the 5-on-5 be better, and were you cool with that? Also, do you think my theory is too far-fetched? Let me know down in those comments below. And are you really into the AEW situations going on right now with the Death Riders, the Kyle Fletcher, Will Ospreay feud, all of it? Mercedes Moné treating Camille like crap now after they had already demolished her whole character at this point. Yeah, you can tell I have a little bitterness there. Let me know what you think. Sound off on that as well as anything else in those comments down below. Make sure you're subscribed to our YouTube channel and have that bell notification on so that you know when a new video is uploaded each time. And follow us on all of our social media platforms, Facebook, X, Instagram, and you can find us on TikTok as well. So, with all that said, I hope you have a wonderful week as always, and I will come back again next week to talk more pro wrestling because it's what we love here. If you're listening to this, you love it too. So until then, take care and continue to love pro wrestling.